Thank you for joining us once again for this week's discussion for the inaugural One Campus, One Book program. Today we're talking about campaign finance, and joining us today is Professor Joseph Tai from the College of Law. So thank you so much for joining us.
Greetings to you out there in video land.
So to begin with, we've had recent big decisions like Citizens United. Should campaign finance and campaign spending be protected by the First Amendment?
Well, there are two schools of thought about that. The majority school of thought, which is the school of thought behind Citizens United, is that money is speech in the context of campaign finance. Yeah. Money talks. It's a proxy for speech. It buys speech and enables speech, and the more money you pull together, the more you can speak. And so more money is more speech and therefore better. It's foreign to the First Amendment to put quotas on how much you can speak in support of a candidate or a policy, and therefore it should be equally foreign to the First Amendment, putting quotas on campaign contributions and campaign expenditures. I believe that view is a little bit too abstract and unrealistic. The view that I tend to believe is more accurate is the view expressed by my former boss, Justice John Paul Stevens, and he said money is both less than and more than speech. It's less than speech because literally speaking, money doesn't talk. Right? I mean, I have some money in my wallet now, and you know, if I get it out, it doesn't say anything, literally. Yeah. Right? But now look, if I start throwing some money your way, Patrick, right? There's a funny relationship that starts to develop. Right now, Justice Stevens says it's more than speech because it gives the appearance that I'm buying influence. I'm getting perhaps access to Patrick afterwards. Certainly creating a sense of obligation. And maybe for those of you in video land, maybe you are also wondering whether I should feel entitled to own a part of Patrick's time, if not some of his policies if he becomes a politician, or some of his court rulings if he becomes a judge. And we all know this, right? When we date, we know that if we each pay our own dinner, go our own way, right? Then there's no obligation. But gosh, if you let someone else buy you dinner, buy you that movie ticket, there's a weirdness that enters the equation, or maybe there's not, but there's certainly a closer relationship. And so money is both less than speech and more than speech because it creates a sense of obligation or entitlement or ownership, or at least it creates a different relationship than one where money doesn't come into play. And so I think the better view is that, look, to the extent that money has this sort of obligatory influence, or at least the sense that it could buy influence, then the government has a great interest in regulating it, particularly when it's in the context of our electoral politics.
Yeah, okay, so
I do want that back.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I was
counting.
Just running
We
off
have it
right
on
now.
video, fortunately.
So when politicians get all this money, what impact has that had both on whether it's politicians or maybe even the courts? I know that's kind of your expertise.
Okay, well, let's just start at the level before that. What influence does it have in terms of swaying elections? And the data is still preliminary because we haven't really been awash in the level of money that we've seen post Citizens United for more than a couple of years, and we only have one election cycle that we've studied. But during the 2002 election cycle, which was the immediate election cycle after Citizens United, we've seen that in some competitive races, money could move the needle by several percentage points, and so likely made a difference in several competitive races nationwide. Now, what happens after the election? Of course, we don't have any smoking gun evidence that money directly buys votes or directly buys policies, but what we do know is that money buys access, that the people who get to sit at the table and discuss policies with politicians inside the White House or inside Congress are not the people who give $5 to President Obama. They're not the people who wait 24 hours to shake a presidential candidate's hand in line, but they're the people who raise a lot of money, who spend a lot of money, and who bundle a lot of money for politicians. And so I think at the very least we can say that money buys access at the table. And I think the public largely knows this. Yeah. And it can have a corrosive and discouraging effect on public participation in politics, because to the extent that money buys access and you can't compete with the people who can spend millions and billions, then you tend to be a little bit more cynical and a little bit less engaged. And indeed, if you look at the data for the 2012 presidential elections, the top 1% of donors contributed more than 60% of money in outside spending. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and so that's kind of different to the 2008 model where we saw with Obama,
Right. Yes,
lots of more individual donors.
It's staggering. Well, actually, there are two different sets of numbers to look at. First, the amount of money that was spent overall by outside spending groups, and so these are groups that are not directly affiliated with candidates, the super PACs that can spend essentially dark money from anonymous sources. In 2008, before Citizens United, about $150 million was spent by outside interest groups. In 2012, after Citizens United, over $1 billion was spent. And so we broke the $1 billion mark, which makes President Richard Nixon's ambitions of raising $30 million seem petty and amateurish by comparison. And most of that money is coming from large donors, millionaires and billionaires. By the same token, there's no doubt that President Obama reached out to an unprecedented number of grassroots donors who pitched in $5, $10, $20, $25. But let's be realistic. Those aren't the people who are defining White House policy.
Yeah, so what is the kind of solution to this? It's clearly not in the politicians or the incumbent politicians' best interests to change this policy because they're the ones getting the money.
Yeah.
So where do we need to look?
Well, actually, I think the answer, or at least the diagnosis, is more nuanced than that because there's at least an argument that unlimited outside spending can be a way to finance insurgency campaigns against incumbents because incumbents traditionally enjoy at least familiarity with their name recognition and a base of donors. And so there's that argument that Tea Party candidates, et cetera, are financed by well-heeled outside donors. But that said, how can we reduce or at least equalize the playing field so that money becomes less important in politics? I think the answer has to start with a constitutional amendment. Given that these Supreme Court decisions are interpretations of the First Amendment, Congress and the states can't really do anything without amending the Constitution. So you could start by overruling Citizens United by constitutional amendment and recognizing that donors who are not individuals, who are not members of our society, who are not members of our democracy, shouldn't be able to have an outsized influence in terms of money on our politicians and our policies. Now, I think a very interesting solution to too much money in politics might be to introduce more money, but more money via public campaign spending. But again, we have to do that by constitutional amendment. There was a very interesting law that Arizona actually passed before Citizens United, and that law said, hey, look, traditional public financing just simply doesn't work because we don't give you enough money vis-a-vis outside spending, particularly when they can be unlimited in dark money. So here's what we're going to do. This is what Arizona did. If you opt into our public financing system, we will match dollar for dollar what your opponent raises and what outside spending groups spend against you. And so you don't have to feel obligated to any rich, well-heeled donor, and you don't have to spend your time seeking money. You can actually spend your time getting to know your constituents. And I thought that was a wonderful system, right? So if you don't take public financing, go ahead, raise as much money as you want from as many or as few people as you want. But if you want to go with the public financing route, you're not penalized for doing that. Well, lo and behold, the Supreme Court strikes down that law after Citizens United. One would have thought, based on the rationale of Citizens United, money equals speech, more speech is better than less speech, that the court would embrace public financing to allow more candidates access to more money. But instead, the Supreme Court said, no, that public financing penalizes private speech. Private people are going to be discouraged from giving money when they know their money is going to be matched by money on the other side. In other words, if you're thinking about bringing a gun to a knife fight and the other side gets a gun to bring to the knife fight, then you're not going to bring a gun anymore. You're not going to go to the fight. And I think that decision just makes no sense. To the extent that we accept the basic premise that money is speech and that money is political speech, and that the electorate are discerning enough to be able to choose between good and bad speech, then I think we should be able to allow people to crowdsource campaign financing and match the amount of influence that particularly well-heeled donors and outside spending groups can bring into their democracies, either at the federal level or at the state and local levels.
Cool. Well, awesome. Do you have anything else to add before we wrap it up?
You know, I've been talking a lot, but I'm really curious about how your generation thinks about money and politics, because this is not the political system that you created. It's created by judges, lawyers, and politicians who are a generation or two ahead of you. But this is the system you're inheriting, for better or for worse. Right? And so if you care about your democracy, you should care about the amount of money in politics. And I hope I've tried to convey both sides of the issue. And so you have a sense of what the other side is thinking. I think there is something to the notion that money is speech, but I also hope that you'll take away from this that money is a sort of sui generis, strange and unique animal. And when you introduce a big animal into the room, it can't be ignored.
Well, thank you so much to Professor Tai. This is definitely my favorite interview that we've done. As he said, this is a really important...
That's going to cost him something afterwards. Not sure what, maybe.
Grading papers or something.
Yeah, absolutely. He can be my RA for the rest of the year.
So we really hope that you join in on this, the conversation on this really important issue, and let us know what you think about the topic. So Professor Tai, thank you so much.
Patrick, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So please comment, and thank you for joining us.